MAGA is angry with Trump. Last week, US President Donald Trump angered his base by coming out in support of international students and foreign workers to the US. Why is a president notorious for being hardline on immigration and trying to crack down on immigration, suddenly defending people from other countries coming to the US to go to school and work here? I'll break all that down for you here. My name is Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I talk about geopolitics from the perspective of an African. And so if that's something you are into, subscribe to this channel. And so, let's just get right into it. Last week, US President Donald Trump did an interview on Fox News. Fox News is a TV channel that is pro-Trump. And so you expect the interview to go smoothly without any pushback on what Trump is doing. But he actually got a little pushback from the host he was interviewing with, Laura Ingraham. Laura Ingraham had asked Trump about H-1B visas. So here's the thing. H-1B visa is a special type of visa that corporations in the US get for workers from other countries to work, for them. What happens is, if you're a corporation and you had a worker you hired who was not a US citizen, but they have a special skill that you believe you need, you pay $50,000 to the US government for visa for this worker. But earlier this year, Trump increased the application fee for H-1B visa from $50,000 to $100,000. And Laura Ingraham was like, that is not enough. You should cancel H-1B visas altogether. And actually, as we are speaking now, Trump is being lobbied by a lot of the tech companies to reduce the fee back to $50,000. But that's a different conversation. And so while Trump was defending H-1B visas and all that, Laura Ingraham brought the issue of international students. Now, let me give you some breakdown of what is happening with international students in the US, because I'm an international student right now. And I would get back to the interview. As it stands now, the number of international students coming to the US have reduced by somewhere between 20% and 45%. Why such a huge margin? Well, in August, the number of international students who entered the US went down by 20% compared to August 2024. In July, they went down by about 30% compared to the same period last year. And it is believed that altogether, international students went down in population, in terms of admission to the US, by about 40%. Some countries have more, some countries have less. What is happening is, in May 2025, the US State Department, led by Marco Rubio, asked US embassies to stop scheduling interviews with student visa holders or student visa applicants who are coming to the US. And a month later, he removed the hold on the schedule, right? But, usually May to June, July is usually when people go for their visa interviews. So that hold actually affected a lot of people, but even bigger than that, it created confusion in the system. And so a lot of people are confused what is going to happen if they go back to the US. And there was a lot of policy change in relation to visa applications earlier this year. And so even people who have admission to come to school in the US this year, I know somebody who had a visa to come to the school in the US this year, but he didn't come because he said he doesn't know what's going to happen when he comes because of the way things are going, right? And so Trump wants to crack down on immigration. International student admission to the US have reduced. That is successful for Trump, right? So why is Trump defending the US bringing in more international students? Good question. I'll tell you why. In 2023, international students contributed $40 billion to the US economy. That is why in the interview on Fox News, Trump said, verbatim, "I look at this as a business." And then he went on to defend why schools in the US need international students. And then he even said something which I don't think is true, but he said about half of schools in the US will collapse if they didn't have international students. I say I don't think it's true because only about 20% of endowment of money that schools use to run in the US comes from tuition. About 80% of the money comes from other things, right? And so schools don't necessarily need international students to run. If you do international students, they pay more fees than American students. But students from other countries being in the US contribute more to the US economy as a whole, right? And so Trump looking at it from business perspective, that international student reduction or the reduction of international student admission to the US is a big concern for the US because of the money. He actually used that. He said the money was the reason. And that is the best defense for why US needs international students. And two, he went on to also talk about something else that Laura Ingraham didn't even get. But I got exactly what he was saying, and I'll explain what he meant. Trump said, "We actually need more students from other countries to come into the US because I want to get along with the world." What does that mean? You want international students to come to the US because you want to get along with the world? Does it mean that when you give people visas, other country will be nice to you? No. He's talking about soft power. This is based on a conversation I have with a US senator. So when I was in Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas, in one of my classes, we had the senator of the state of Arkansas, John Bozeman, in our class. It was a small class, about 20 people. So it was an intimate, conversation. He came with the director of the World Food Program. I actually have a whole video on that interaction up. I'll post it up here and I'll post it at the end of this video if you're interested in the fuller story. But he said international students are important for US national security. And then he says his reason he gave was that one time he was representing the US government in a country in the Middle East, and he had a 1-hour meeting with the foreign minister of this country. And that is when he found out that this foreign minister actually went to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville and actually had a good time in Fayetteville. University of Arkansas is one of the big party schools in the US, the SEC conference, And so he said that this foreign minister even knows Fayetteville more than me, the senator of the state of Arkansas, as a joke. And then he also said they spent 45 minutes of their 1-hour meeting just talking about how much fun the foreign minister had when he was in Arkansas. And so the last 15 minutes, the foreign minister was like, you know what, I'm going to do what you want. The US is asking them to do. And then they used 15 minutes to complete a deal that usually would have taken months and weeks to complete, just because the senator of the state of Arkansas is meeting with somebody who went to school in the University of Arkansas. You understand that? So when he says international student is important for US national security, it's about the fact that the US has an easier time doing transactions or diplomacy with other countries when the people in those countries have a positive feeling. It's funny that the world as we stand, the fate of the world depends on feelings and egos of people. And so the US having people in other countries having positive feelings towards the US It's good for the US national security. That is why Donald Trump said we need international students from other countries to come to the US because I want to get along with the world. You understand? So it's about the US national security and diplomatic interest. You understand? So that is what Trump was talking about. I know people like to have this conversation from a moral and, goodwill point of view. But Trump said in the interview with, I keep pointing here because my TV is here and I just watched the interview. Trump said in the interview that I look at this as a business. So, in the business of America first, it is important that America has influence in other countries to make the job of America having, control in those countries easier. That's what it is. It's exactly what, Trump was trying to explain. And it's not even about just, things like diplomacy. Even when it comes to American businesses doing business in other countries or Americans traveling to other countries, we have people who have traveled to the US and lived in the US before. It is easier for Americans for cultural purposes. So let me give you an example. Whenever I'm talking to my friends in Ghana, I have to remind myself that I'm talking to my friends in Ghana. It's not even about language because me and my friends in Ghana, we mostly only speak Pidgin or English, right? And so the reason why I have to remind myself is just cultural nuances that exist. So I'll give you a graphic example because it will be the best formed way of explaining this. The other time I was on the phone with my boy in Ghana, who I like to call my twin because we were born on the same day. And my twin asked me, said something about my private part. Because me and him went to St. Peter's, and in St. Peter's, it was boarding school. All of us used one big bathroom. So everybody who went to St. Peter's with somebody else knows how that person's private part looks. We all know how each other's body looked back in high school, right? And so he said something about my private part. There was a reason he said it, but the way he framed his expression or what he said, my first thought was, yo, pause. That's so gay. But then I remember that I'm talking to somebody in Ghana, and in Ghana, it's totally acceptable for men to talk about the body of other men, and it's totally acceptable for men to show affection towards other men. So if you're working in Ghana, you see two guys with their hand around each other or holding hands, and it's totally platonic. It's not that deep. In the US, whenever you see two guys with hands around each other, most of the time, or holding hands, it's mostly romantic. You understand? And so I remember that, oh, okay, I'm talking to somebody in Ghana, and so this expression that he made is totally fine in the context of Ghana. But if I'm talking to somebody in the US and they said that, I'm like, yo, bro, what are you trying to do? You understand? And so those cultural nuances matter in communication. So there was American R&B artist Mario who was in Ghana to perform in the 2010s. And he tweeted that men were hitting on him in the club. And Mario is a fine boy, good looking man. And so I immediately understood what Mario was saying. What he was saying was men were complimenting him in the club in Ghana. In the US, usually if you are outside in a club, specifically in that type of setting, and somebody is complimenting you or saying nice things to you or even offering you a free drink, a lot of time they are hating on you. They are trying to get with you. And in Ghana, that is not the case. We just compliment each other. You just walk on the street and everybody is calling each other boss. We call all women queen or hima. Ghanaians use the expression. I saw this TikTok of this girl saying that when she was in Ghana, both men and women will be calling her my dear. My dear, and at first it was a put off for her, then she got what that means. I'm using these examples to explain that cultures differ. And so it is easier to deal with people of other cultures if you have ever lived in that culture. If you visited the US for a week, 3 weeks, 1 month, you may not necessarily get the nuances of the differences in culture. But if you live there for a year or more, you begin to get the different cultural nuances. And so, again, what Trump is expressing is that it is easier for Americans to do business around the world if Americans are doing business with people who understand American culture. You understand? And I'll end by saying this. You would think you understand American culture because you watch American television. You don't. You always experience some cultural shock when you come to the US and realize that America you see on TV is not the same as America you see Philly. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight Trump's defense of international students in the US because I thought that it was an interesting defense. And I'll put the video with the Senator of Arkansas at the end of this video. And also subscribe to this channel if you are interested in getting more of my thought on geopolitics from my perspective as an African who lives in the US. Thank you. Talk to you later.